Hello everyone, this is Leslie Pelch at the Vermont Center for Geographic Information, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today on using QGIS and specifically on creating map layouts in QGIS. I'm going to start today with this one slide PowerPoint just to orient all of us to using the GoToWebinar interface. So I will start out by just pointing out the various parts of the panel that you should see on some side of your screen that gives you access to the tools and controls related to the GoToWebinar interface. The first thing is that you can open and close that panel if it's staying open and it's in your way. You just need to click on the little orange arrow to close it up. And then you'll see that that small panel remains, and you can click on it again to open it back up if you'd like to. Make sure you've got your audio settings set correctly. If you can't see it, if you can't hear me, you may need to change your settings. So if you're using the telephone, make sure it's set to telephone. If you're using a mic and speakers, make sure it's set to mic and speakers. Don't use the number that you see here if you're using a telephone and you haven't called in yet. Make sure to use the phone number in your panel. So when you open this audio panel up, you will see a phone number in there. And you open and close the various pieces of your panel by clicking on the little plus signs that you'll see. And obviously closing by clicking on the minus signs. You can submit questions at any time by using the question section of your panel. It allows you to type in a question, and when you send it, it'll come to me. I can choose to ignore them if I want during the webinar, but I will check them every so often just to see if there are any that need to be answered right away. For the most part, I will probably save them till the end. And then I want to also point out that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted at VCGI's YouTube page, which you can get to by either searching for Vermont Geospatial, VT Geospatial, or going to the front page of VCGI's the front page of our website, and over on the left below the contact information, you'll see a little row of symbols that link you to various social media options, and one of those is the YouTube icon. So you can get directly to our YouTube page that way. And then the final thing is I would like you all, so that I know you can hear me, I'd like you all to click on this hand, it's a little orange hand, and once you do that, I actually see that on my panel, and that way I know that you can all hear me. So yeah, so go ahead and click on that little hand if you see it. And I'm just gonna, okay, somebody's having an issue with sound, but let me see if they've resolved it yet. So Mary, if you are having any luck hearing, go ahead and click on that orange hand to let me know that you can hear, but I don't think you can. All right, I'm just gonna respond very briefly. And I will continue on. Okay. So today we are going to talk about QGIS. And specifically, we're going to, sorry, I just need to close this. We are going to work on kind of the final step generally when you're working on something in QGIS, and that is composing your map image and various other elements into a map layout. So I'm going to start out by opening QGIS. So I'm just going to my Start menu, All Programs, scroll down till I see QGIS, and open up the QGIS desktop option. So here's our blank map. I'm going to open up an existing project, an existing map, and just kind of use that as our sample map. So this is just a map of the state with some watershed boundaries showing. So the first step to doing a layout, once you've finished your map, generally you wait until you've got the various aspects of your map really set the way you want them. The symbology, labeling. This is something I encounter every so often. Is there are people who don't realize you actually usually do your labeling right here in the map view. We're not going to talk about how you do that today, and I don't really have any labels on here, but that is labeling, symbology, deciding what extent you want your map to be. Usually get all that done before you move on to the composition, layout. But you can go back and change things, just so you know you don't have to be completely done before you move on to the composer. There's no danger in starting to get into that. So up here in the tools and tabs, you'll see some icons that when we hover over them, you can see they relate to the composer. So new print composer is the one that you would use to create a new print session or composing session. And then the composer manager is what you would click on if you are coming back to your project and you know you've already created a composition. So I'm going to click on new print composer because I don't have any in here yet. And I'm just going to call this webinar. And so keep in mind that the fact that you can set up multiple compositions means that you could create different versions of your map. Now, you do not have the ability to bring, well, do you? Actually, no, that I was about to say something I'm not sure is true. I was going to say you don't have the ability to bring in sort of different extents. So like maybe one map would be a close-up and one map would be a more of a zoomed out version, but right at the moment I can't remember if that's actually true. So we might try that a little bit later, just to remind me. So here we have a blank map, essentially. And the first thing we're going to look at before we even put anything on here is over on the right. You'll see these three tabs: composition, item properties, and atlas generation. So composition refers to the whole thing. First of all, the composition is your layout, essentially. And it allows you to set things like paper size, orientation, print quality for the output file which is obviously important if you're planning to generate a digital file as your end product, and a couple other things that we can control in here. So initially what we're going to do is set our paper size, which if we scroll down a little bit, we can find just a regular letter. Let's see, we want to set our orientation to portrait since it's a map of Vermont. Doesn't have to be, obviously, but that's what I'm going to do. And I'll leave my resolution as it is. All right, so there's my page setup, basically, is under composition. Item properties, you'll notice there's nothing there because we don't have any items on our map yet. So let's start adding things to our map. The various items that we can add to our map, as always seems to be true with GIS, can be added and accessed in a number of different ways. There are icons that in my version here are by default along the left side of my composition. So I might start with my map, and notice that whenever you're using QGIS, when you can't remember which icon is which, you can always just hover for a moment and you'll get a little pop-up that tells you what it is. So I'm going to click on Add New Map and just draw a box. So nothing happened when I clicked on Add New Map. I actually have to then move my cursor onto the page and draw a box. So once I draw the box and then let go, and again, if anyone's not familiar, drawing a box just means left click, hold down that left mouse button while you drag your cursor over to the other corner. That draws the box, and when you let go, it actually puts the map view in there. You can see that now that we have an element, we have all sorts of now that we have an item, we have all sorts of item properties. And a number of these we're going to set right away. I'm going to change cache to render. So your options here in terms of cache, rectangle, you notice is just sort of a placeholder. Cache means it's not necessarily going to update every time you change things on the map or resize the map view. But I actually do want it. And the reason that you would choose those is to maybe save time, improve performance. If you don't really need to see your map, the map image itself updated every time you change the size of this box, you could switch it to one of those other options. But I do actually want to see how it looks. Next thing is going to be scale, which is sort of interesting that we can change this in here. Which is also the reason I actually think you can do, when you do multiple compositions, I think perhaps you can do different scales basically and extents in your different compositions. So I'm going to change this in order to get a better zoom level for my map. I can never remember what's going to be right. And I'm doing it on my top. Okay, that looks better. Now, obviously, we still have a problem, right? Because our map is not centered properly. And this is a key thing that's easy to get a little bit confused about. There are two select move item icons over here. There are two select options. One is select move item. The other one is move item content. Now, obviously, once you read those, they're fairly clear which is which. But the tricky thing is that once you've set your cursor to one or the other, it's easy to forget what you have it set to, and that can cause some frustration. So I'm going to change it to move item content, which allows me to now pan basically on the map, drag the map around a little bit. But by leaving myself in this mode, what I've done is I now don't have the ability to select an item or resize an item. So I've got my little boxes here around my map, but I can't do anything with them until I switch back to select move item, which then lets me interact with my items. So obviously the move item content really only lets you move item content, whereas the select move item lets you interact with the various items in a variety of ways. Okay, so there's our map. Move it over just a little bit. Some of the other things that we can change over here in the item properties for our map item. Let's see, the ones I want to highlight. Oh, is there really anything else? Nope, actually, I guess there's nothing else over here that's terribly, that you really need to know right away. There are a lot of options, but we're not going to do most of these. Rotation, there's something that actually people have asked me about recently, is we can change the rotation of the map. That's a nice thing that they've added. Frame and background, those were the other two. So right now, it doesn't have a frame, which means when the item is not selected, there's no frame around it. I can obviously quickly and easily add a frame. Now that's going to put the frame directly around the map item box, which limits us in some ways because I'm not really centered here. It looks a little funny, so that might not be how I want to put a frame on. But if I do, I can do frame, I can do background. This right now is actually set to have an opaque white background, which can make a difference when you put more items on here and something gets stuck behind it. So I'm actually going to keep both turned off right now. All right, so there's my map. So let's add some more elements. We obviously want to have a title on here. Make a little space up at the top for my goofy map here. And in order to add a title, we go back over to our list of icons, or we could go up to the layout menu and you'll see that all the same options for adding elements are listed up here. So if it's easier for you to open up a menu and actually see the words that say what our options are, you can use that as a way to find the items that you can add. So add label, sort of unfortunate that they called it this, but add label is essentially just an add text box option. And you can see that once again, you click on that option or you choose that option, then you draw a box on the map. Actually, so really I could just click on the map also, have the same result. But you are going to have to resize your text box once you put your title in and change your font sizes and everything. For some reason, it does not resize automatically. So map of Vermont watersheds. And then we can change so under appearance, we've got our font, the font itself, as well as the size. We can do our bold, italic, whatever. We can do the size right over here. We can do strikeout and underline. All right, now the problem is, of course, we can't see it, so we just need to resize our text box a little bit, or a fair amount, actually. And we also want to change our alignment. Go ahead and make that centered. You can do vertical alignment as well if you have a bit of text, or if you want a border around it, want it to be centered a particular way within that. So once again, by default, there's no frame, and on the text, there's no background. But if we wanted that text to have a frame and background, we can just go right down here in order to add those, and also obviously edit those in terms of color. And with frame, we have both the color, the thickness, and the join style, meaning how the corners are going to be either beveled, mitered, rounded. All right, so there's our title. Oh, and I will point out that you can, the insert expression allows you to take advantage of the a variety of different things here. What was I looking for? There. I was thinking this was going to give me access to the attribute table. I'm not seeing that. There it is. There we go. So obviously you can do mathematical things in here if there's some reason that is helpful, geometry related, but this does also give us access to the attribute table if we want to create, if we want the title to be created from the from attributes. Okay, I think that's all in here. Again, rotation, we can control the rotation of our text box. Okay. Another common element or item that we see on a map that people want to add is the scale bar. Got an icon over here for scale bar. We click on that, click on the map. Puts one in that has some default settings, which we can change. So there's a few different styles. Just the visual aspect of the scale bar. And then there are the somewhat more important aspects, which are the units, the label, the map units per bar unit, the number of segments. So we might decide that rather than meters, we really would prefer this be in feet, which you'll notice it automatically does in miles, given the scale of this particular map. To be honest, I'm not sure why we have label on here still, since it obviously changed to miles. We can change the number of segments. So notice that by default it's doing 2 segments to the left of 0 and then 4 segments, I think, to the right of the 0. We can change that if we want no segments to the left. I've never understood the point of that. Apologize for my ignorance. We can obviously do more segments to the right if we want to. And we can make it a little bit bigger or smaller if we want. Okay, so there's our scale bar. Okay, so those are 2 pretty simple, relatively simple elements that we generally want to add or often want to add. A slightly more complicated one, but that is still fairly easy to deal with, is the legend. And once again, there's an icon that's Add New Legend. We draw a box, and it pops in a default legend. Now, the legend is probably one of the things you're going to work on the most, unless you've prepared ahead really well, which I obviously haven't here. It automatically is pulling in the names of the data layers as they appear in the map view. Obviously also bringing in the symbology as well. One of the nice things about this system, which is the same as ArcGIS, is that you can change all of this. You can edit all of these things. Actually, you can edit these things without doing the switch to graphic operation. You just start editing and it'll change it. And if at some point you realize you don't want to retain the edits that you've made, if you want to start from scratch, you actually just tell it, recreate this again and just plug in all of the defaults rather than so either way, you can edit this, and if you don't like the edits that you've made, you can go back and edit it more, or you can kind of start from scratch and have it just start from this point again. There is a live link between the legend and the map view, and I should point out, actually, if you can see down at the bottom of my screen, the Print Composer window and the map view are separate windows, so I can go back to the map view, and for instance, I could decide, rather than editing the names of the items in my legend over in the Print Composer, perhaps I should just do it in here. Oops. So I can change it here, and when I come back to my legend, you can see that it's already changed over here. So again, 2 different ways that you can change this depending on what makes most sense for your project. For instance, if you wanted these to appear different ways in different composer or compositions, then you might not want to make that change back in the map view. You might only want to do it here in the legend itself. So in order to edit things in here, all I have to do is turn off auto update and go in and click on one of the elements in the legend, and then go to the symbol that looks like a pencil, and that's going to allow me to edit it. And notice the Update All button. So Update All, oh, it gives you a nice explanation now. Update whole legend. So what that means is any changes you've made are going to go away. So any editing that you've done in here, in the composition, in the actual editing of the legend, are going to be wiped away, and it's going to go back to whatever you see over in the map view. So in this case, I could actually go ahead and do that. You'll see I got rid of my Lake Champlain because I did that editing in here, but the watershed boundaries remains because that is actually how it appears in the map view. So I'm not going to go through and edit all of these, but you can see how that works. You can also remove things. So sometimes you have things in your legend or in your map view that you really don't need to have in the legend. This particular one is not a great example, but I could get rid of, actually, we're not seeing some of these layers at this scale, so perhaps I will get rid of them for that reason. So I'll get rid of the water DLG Lake Poly. You can see it's as simple as highlighting it and clicking on the minus sign. And again, we're not getting rid of it, anything from the map. We're just getting rid of it in the legend. We can't see the road, so we can remove that. Let's remove these layers that we can't see. Okay. And actually, I can put those capitals in. Underneath the listing of the legend items, we see all the different ways that we can change aspects of this. So we have the fonts, and you'll notice there are 4 levels of font. And I have to admit that on the rare occasion when I have a somewhat more complicated legend, I'm not always absolutely sure which is a subgroup, a group, or an item. But generally speaking, you can just fool around with this to figure it out. So I believe these are all individual items. So let's see if we can, yeah. So, so this is going to apply to all of the things, all of the legend items that fit within that particular category. So if I were to change these other ones, it wouldn't change anything. But since these are all considered items, it does change them. Obviously, we've also got font color. We can change things like columns. So if you have so many legend items that you want to do multiple columns, you can do that. Symbol width has to do with the size of, in this case, the patches. Let's see. Yep, we have spacing for all the different items that you're going to find in that legend. Position and size. Generally speaking, you're going to probably just do that interactively, drag it around. If you want to make it bigger, just drag a corner. Change where the edge of the box is. Rotation, again, we can change rotation. We can put a frame on it. This time I will leave the frame. I'll maybe give it a colored background just for the heck of it. We can affect the transparency of the item as well. Not sure exactly what blending mode is. Exclude item from exports. Okay, so there's a simple legend. So the key thing there is to realize there's quite a bit of the legend that you can edit. And so when you first pull in your default legend, just make sure to edit it in ways that help make it easier to read and understand. Some other things that we can put in here, I was going to say aspects of our composition that we can change, are we can add an image. So the thing that I've noticed with adding an image is simply that you have to be patient for just a few seconds more than you might normally. So when you add an image, oh, actually that wasn't so bad. That was pretty quick. You draw a box, but you've said you're going to add an image, but then there's nothing there. So you're essentially adding a placeholder for an image until you tell the software where the image is. So this might be how you add a logo or a photograph. You can also put things like your north arrow in this way. So if we create a box for an image and then we click on search directories to open that up, that's where we see some preloaded symbols. And notice that there's also a path here to this particular pile of symbols, and there are some other symbols that are preloaded that you can choose to look at. Oops. And if you have your own symbol set that you want to add, you can point it towards that as well. So I'm going to put a simple north arrow in there. and then resize it a bit. And obviously, if we were doing a logo or a photograph, we would just click on the Browse button to navigate to that. Let's see, some other fun options over here are adding the attribute table. So I know that on some maps, you actually have a reason to add all or part of your attribute table. So by default, we are trying to put the whole thing in there. So this is the, oh, actually, how did that decide? Hold on. How did it decide? So by default, it picked the town boundaries. I think perhaps because they're on the bottom of the list of data layers. Yeah. But notice that right away, again, it does it by default, just fills it in, but we can immediately change both what data layer it's looking to for an attribute table and various other aspects of what it's showing. So I could change it from town boundaries to watershed boundaries if I wanted to, although I might not want to do this, but we'll try it. Yeah, it's going to create a kind of a silly table because it has too many different attributes to make a decent table. But notice that we can, oh, it gives a maximum number of rows. That's good. So we can just sort of set some limits. We can remove duplicate rows. We can also filter this. I'm not going to have a good example for this, but so we could pick out certain features that we actually want to include in the table. And then, of course, we have control over the fonts of the heading and the contents. Rotation, frame, and background. So let's actually go back to town boundaries. It's probably a better one to include. And you'll notice it's actually being defined by how big I've drawn the box. So as I make the box bigger, it's letting more things show. So they're all there, although this is right now set to a maximum of 30, so it's only going to show the top 30 rows. So this is something that you would want to work on if you actually wanted a meaningful table in here. Some other things over here of interest. Let's see. You can add shapes, which sometimes can be a better option for things like the border, or usually the legend works out okay with the frame and colored background. But if there are other reasons that you want to put shapes on here that form borders or backgrounds, you can always do it. You have a limited number of shapes, but you can add those. And obviously arrows if you want to point to something. So keep in mind that this arrow option right here is not a north arrow. You could obviously make your own little north arrow using this by just drawing a simple arrow, but it's not your best option for north arrow. Add HTML frame. I haven't worked with that, so I don't know exactly what that does, but I assume that adds an HTML frame. Bring in something from the internet. All right, I think those are our main elements that we would generally be interested in adding. Oh, so keep in mind, once you've added all of these things and you're sort of fussing around with them, adding things, realizing that you want to change things, you know, that font is really silly, the color in the background is a little too bright, make sure your cursor is set to the select move item option, not the move item content. And as long as that's the case, you're going to be able to choose your different items, change your settings, drag things around. And if for some reason something gets behind something else, you can always change, raise selected items. So if something's hidden by the background of something else, you want it to be on top if you're actually using an overlapping style as a way to put your elements on the page. You've got raise selected items. Actually, you've got raise, lower, bring to front, send to back. And then you also can do an align. So if you have a number of items, like let's say these, yeah. So with QGIS, in order to select multiple items, you want to hold down the Shift key. All right, so those 3 items are now selected, and I can click on this align option, and I can do align left, center, right, top, center, vertical, align bottom, and it will align them. So that's kind of nice if you have, oops, but I didn't do the final thing, did I? Hold on. And then, of course, we can group these items together, so now they get treated kind of like one item. We can ungroup, so they go back to being separate. So very similar options as in ArcGIS, just found in slightly different places. Zoom to full. Okay, so let's assume I've made a perfect, lovely map that I'm very happy with, and I'm ready to do whatever my final step is in terms of publishing it. Right up here, we have a few icons that give us some options. One is to export it as an image. That's going to obviously give us our image format, and I can save that wherever I'd like. Another is to export it as an SVG. I don't honestly, SVG is some kind of like a symbol format, I think, right? So that might be if you wanted to turn a map into a an icon, something like that. We've got export as PDF, which is also just going to open up the Save As box. We also have somewhere up here, well, I thought that was right up here, but maybe not. But there was an option to save. I think I'm just not seeing it. Save as, yeah, save as a template. So we can, so if we have created a map that we really like and we know, or a composition that we really like, and we know we're going to be making some other maps that need perhaps a similar title. This is where actually using an expression for the title that maybe pulls in information from the attribute table. And we know that we want our legend to have the same format at least, and the scale bar and the north arrow and everything. We can save this as a template, and then we can open up this template again in the future. And often that's helpful if you have logos and information about your organization, that kind of thing. What else was I just thinking? Here, no, I think that's it. And then obviously if you just want to print it out, click on print. And then if you actually, what you actually need to do is a series of maps. For instance, if I wanted to make, and I'm not going to do this process in full, I don't think, but let's just talk through it at least. So an atlas is pretty much what you would think it would be, which is a series of maps, and a series of maps where you're using a data layer to define the different maps. So if it's just a grid, if you have a data layer that's a grid that creates those different individual maps that show a section of your map, essentially tiling your map into separate maps, you might have that grid layer that you would use. Another option in this case might be watersheds. So perhaps I would use my watershed boundaries as my coverage layer. So hidden or not means, do I want the boundaries of this layer actually to be showing or not? I probably do. Yes, you're going to create a name for your maps that is going to include, again, or can include a attribute name. So for instance, I could pick, let's see, unfortunately I'm not going to remember which of these is the name. Yeah, so so I might pick subbasin as my my name for each map. So it's going to say output, whatever, and then I can add in subbasin. Oh, maybe I have to say equals. There we go. So this is going to assign this name to my output map. And if I want it sorted so that it, I guess that just is going to produce them in a certain order, I can pick an attribute. All right. I don't think we're actually going to generate an atlas right now, though, because I just wanted to point out this option rather than actually do it today. All right, I can see that I've got a question. I think I'm going to pause now and let people go ahead and ask questions or think about, oh, the question is going to be about the atlas, of course. Title block template, or do you need to create new for each sheet? So I assume that's a question about the atlas, and no, you can definitely create the title block template, because that is, we can actually do that even on this map by simply inserting an expression. So let's say I wanted to say, instead of map of remote watersheds, map of the blank watershed. This may be redundant, but okay. So I have just created, I've just used an expression so that it will plug in the value of that attribute into my title. And if I was creating an atlas, it would be that much more important to do that, because each map obviously is actually showing a different section of the map. So you would want your title to either be generic or to actually have some individualized name using an expression. So if anyone has any other questions about creating a relatively simple map layout, I'm thinking that, just so you know, that I'm going to be doing another webinar at some point this late fall or early winter that will be, perhaps we'll call it an intermediate level composition webinar, where we will talk a little bit more about atlas generation. I have done the atlas generation before, but I haven't done it recently, so I wasn't planning to do it today, but I wanted to mention it since we had time. But I would be happy to demonstrate that, because I have done it and it worked. And the other thing I hope to get working so that I can talk about it is QGIS Cloud. I struggled a bit recently and today to try to get this to work, because I know that it has worked for other people, but I'm not sure whether it was the version of QGIS I had or what was going on, but it was causing some flaky things to happen where everything freezes up. So I abandoned that effort today, but I would like to get that working so that I can show it to you in the future. And just a quick overview is that QGIS Cloud allows you to publish your QGIS map to an online cloud-based system. You can create a free login, and it will allow you to upload an unlimited number of maps, but there are other limitations that have to do with what data is being used in your map. If you're using local data, you have to upload that data into a database, and that's where you start to come across your limits. If you're creating maps using services, however, you don't bump into those limits. And I say all that with the faith that I will eventually get this to work. Can you clip the outside of the map? Oh, you're talking about my watershed here, yes. Yes, you can, but you wouldn't do that most likely you wouldn't do that in your composition. You would do that in here. So I left mine this way because I kind of like this messy look, but it certainly is possible to clip your data depending on what type of data you're working with. In this case, because they're watershed boundaries, I guess that's the other reason I left these on here. So yeah, I'm not going to go into the different ways you can do that, except to say that in QGIS, you will see that there are lots of different tools that are very similar to what you'll find in ArcGIS. So we have clip in here, we have union, we have dissolve. So yeah, you would just have to do a little bit of research into these different options. Another good topic for an intermediate level webinar. Let's see. Yeah, okay, good. All right. Any other questions out there? I know this is pretty simple, but I just want to introduce everyone to the basics, and hopefully we'll follow this up with another webinar at another time that goes into Atlas options and QGIS Cloud options. If there's interest, actually, if you're interested, make sure to indicate that. I believe when you all leave today, you will be taken immediately to a feedback form. And if you could take just a moment to fill that out, I'd really appreciate it. And feel free to put in any requests you have for what sorts of topics you'd like to see in the future, either QGIS related or other GIS related topics. We're happy to at least look into whether it's something we can offer. And you can suggest higher level, more technical stuff, because I find other presenters to do those. Or if you'd like to volunteer to do a webinar, I'd be happy to hear from you. So hope this was helpful for everyone, and remember this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube page within a day or two, and look forward to other webinars that we put out there. Thank you very much.